Alright guys, today we're gonna make a French onion soup, and I've never actually made this before. I'm not a chef. Actually, I'm just barely learning to cook, but the more I try cooking, the more I enjoy it, and the more I realize it's not that difficult. I think the key thing to making really good food is having a good recipe, and actually my wife's pretty good at finding easy recipes that are delicious, but then also having fairly decent ingredients. One other thing I find with certain recipes, if you want really good homemade from scratch food, you need a little patience, and this is one of those recipes. It's not something you can rush, but it will be worth it. So for this recipe, we'll start out with 6 large onions. We're gonna chop them up. And then in a large pot, we're going to put in some olive oil, let that heat up a bit, put in some butter, and once the butter started to melt, we can go ahead and add our onions. Also add about a clove or 2 of garlic. Some salt to season it. And now is where the waiting game happens. Basically, we want to reduce those onions, we want to caramelize them, but we want to do it very slowly. In the past, actually, my son has done a really good job at this recipe, and he's taken like an hour to an hour and a half to get these to caramelize properly. We're just going to kind of let it sit there, let it do its thing. Nice and easy. We're going to let these cook. All right, now we're starting to get where we want. Starting to develop that nice, rich brown color. Those nice, deep flavors. We're getting pretty close to what we want. We are gonna leave it a little bit longer. It's usually starting to get that nice color. You want to make sure you don't burn them. You don't want really black spots because that's where the bitterness will come from. But while that's finishing its thing, we're gonna go ahead and make some croutons. I know traditionally a lot of people put like whole slices of bread on there. I personally like croutons because then you can kind of get little bites of it. And I'm just gonna use some bread. I'm gonna chop it up into cubes, put a little salt, pepper, maybe a little olive oil in there. Put in the broiler for about 400 degrees. Just keep it on it, get it nice and dry, and then we'll set those aside. We'll be ready to top our soup once it's finished. This is nicely browned. I think this is pretty much exactly what we want. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna add 1 tablespoon of flour. And essentially what we wanna do is just kind of coat the flour over all of these onions. I wanna stir this in. Really thickens it up nicely. Okay, we'll let that sit for 1 minute. Next, we're gonna add a little bit of white wine. This is cheap white wine. Add about 1/3 of a cup. Kind of stir that in. That smells so good. I just wanna let that cook down a little tiny bit. All right, so the wine is cooked down a little bit. What we're gonna do now, we're gonna add the rest of the wine. So this recipe calls for a cup altogether. I'm not really measuring. I'm just looking, there's about 3 cups in a bottle of wine. Stir that in. And then this recipe also calls for 8 cups of chicken broth, but what I'm gonna be using is this Better Than Bouillon. Roughly 8 teaspoons to 8 cups of water. So we're gonna go with about like 3 of these big tablespoons. 1, 2, 3. We can also add a little bit more if we find we need a little bit more of this flavoring. Add 8 cups of water. And we want to bring this up to a boil now. Crank up that heat. pull these out, just give them a little quick stir, move them around a little bit. Ideally, we just kind of want to dry them out, maybe a little bit of brown on them. And sometimes I find it's worth it to rotate this pan. Seems to be much hotter at the back. A couple more minutes. All right, so this soup has been reducing for about an hour since we added the chicken stock and the white wine. We've got our croutons done, and we've got our cheese, our Gruyère cheese, or some type of a mild Swiss cheese. We've got that shredded. We're gonna put it into bowls and then put the croutons on, put the cheese on top, and then we're gonna set our oven to about 550. A nice broil. You wanna put it in there, keep an eye on it. You wanna get that cheese bubbling and a little tiny bit of brown, and it's ready to serve. This is a soup you want to serve really, really hot, so I don't know how much more I'm gonna do talking to the camera, because once this stuff comes out of the oven, we're gonna get on it. That was good. I'll tell you what, folks, this was absolutely delicious, and it's an easy recipe. If I can cook this, you can cook this. It just takes a little time, a little attention, but it is so worth it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I thank you so much for watching. Cheers.